Thank you all for coming. A lot of familiar faces. My name is Patrick Schmidt. I'm with Avis & Young representing Prime Group. I'll do some other introductions in a second. But I wanted to thank some elected officials who came tonight, and Jeff Cohen, who's a Ward 5 counselor, Cindy Girazzo, who's a Ward 1 counselor, Ty Hapworth, who's our city
Patrick,
council.
are you going to use the mic?
Certainly, Polly. Sorry. I thought everyone could hear me anyway. I'll start over. Thank you, Jeff Cohen. Thank you, Megan Scott. Thank you, Cindy Girazzo, Patty Marcello, Ty Hapworth, and Alice Merkel. Thank you all for coming. Hopefully today is very productive. I want to get a lot of feedback. It's honestly been probably, we did the Sasaki discussions, 16 months ago where we got a lot of community feedback. I think you're going to see a lot of the Sasaki here. You're going to see a lot of community input. When we had the first meetings in one of those rooms down the other end of Shetland, where we garnered a lot of thoughts from everyone, including saving businesses, etc. So that's the intent for today. Today is really to get kind of where we're at out to everyone so they can see it. Again, get some feedback, kind of let you know what our goals are, what we've been doing, where we're kind of headed, a little bit of a roadmap on the process. This is not a proposal. This is where we're at. And we're still looking for feedback, right? We're still looking, right? There are certain pieces, I don't know if the word's politically, but there are certain pieces we need. We are starting to talk with the city about the 40R process and some other pieces. So again, feedback, and we'll go through the process in a minute. So by way of introductions, we've got a full team here today. Eric, who's with RKG, is helping us with the community preservation study, which we used to know under a different name, but we just didn't like it. So we're really going to ask, we're going to do some breakout groups at the end. So he's really going to want some names. We've had a hard time getting input to complete the study. It's the reason the study's not done. We just don't have enough input. So we'd really like some people to spend some time with Eric if we can when we're done. Zach's here from Bowler. Jeff from Vaness Traffic. I'm sorry. Ryan. I'm all with Scott. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. So I only see Jeff on Zoom. I always see Bill Tinty, so I lost that. Sorry. And the rest of the team is from Coulson Stores as we've gotten into the 40R process. It's Jody, Peter Tam, and Megan. Sorry. So thank you again all for coming. Again, the plan here today is to spend the next 30 minutes doing a presentation, 30 minutes for questions and answers, and then another 30 minutes on breakout groups. Breakout groups will be community impact, which will also cover Eric's questions, and we'll also do a 40R process so people can fully understand. So free choose to go whichever direction you want. We'll do one in here, and we'll do one in the other room. So I think at this point, we'll get right into it, and I'll give it to Sean.
Thanks, Patrick. Can everybody hear me okay? What were you pointing to, Jeff? My name is Sean Selby, and I'm with Arrow Street. We're architects and designers. We're based in Boston. It's about an hour away from here, 13 miles, go figure. Happy to be here, and I recognize a lot of people in the crowd today. So some of what you're going to see is a repeat. Sorry if you've seen it 10 or 20 times. I assure you there's some new slides here as well. But I also see some new faces that I haven't, people I haven't met yet, and happy to show you the plans. As Patrick said, this is where we are today. We're looking for feedback. So let's get to it. Let's get to it. Hello. It's magic. There we go. Almost there. Presentation. Perfect. Magic. Okay, so tonight, as Patrick said, we're dividing the time we have together up into a few different components, so three components. The first bit we're going to present to you where we are. We're going to describe the project, how we've gotten here, the process of how we've gotten here, the meetings we've had, and we're going to show you the master plan as it exists today. The second part and the third part are going to be, we're looking for ideas, comments, questions from you all, just as we have for going on 3+ years. Over those 3+ years, we've met with a lot of people. Some of these folks we've only met once. A bunch of these we've met a number of times, and there's a few, looking at you, Point Neighborhood Association, we've met a lot of times. And over that time, we've heard a lot of things about how to think about this site in particular, Shetland Park, the Point Neighborhood. We've heard everything from, gee, we wish this Shetland Park could be built for today's needs. We wish that this place was more resilient, more sustainable. We hope that you keep all of the jobs in the commercial space on site that is here today. It's about 1 million square feet in all of these buildings on this campus today. We want to keep all that square feet, all those spaces, all that commercial space, and all those jobs that are here today. We want to keep them on site. The school's in an old factory building. Is that right? Is that the best way to run a school? Not sure. These are some of the comments that we've heard over the last 3 years. There you go. And as Patrick mentioned, a couple of years ago, in 2022, a lot of you will remember that the city hired a third-party consultant to study the site, to study Shetland Park, and talk about what could be. Can you see okay? And talk about what could be on the site. How could we redevelop the site so that it meets today's needs? And through the course of a year, you can go download the report from the city today. There were a number of what they called framework plans, and those framework plans which were developed over the course of time, where we, Sasaki and the city, and we met with folks like you in meetings just like this. There were charrettes, there were visioning sessions, Q&As, and developed a series of frameworks that talked about how to redevelop this site. And it did come up with a level of density that isn't here today. By adding residential components, by adding a hotel potentially, by perhaps relocating the school, building a new school, and building new commercial space that's built for today's needs. Not a factory building from 100 years ago, but today's needs. There we go. So like I say, over these 3 years, we've heard a lot of things. And so this is just a word cloud of all the concepts and themes and questions and comments that we've heard over that time. Some of these things have come up multiple times. Some have come up only a few times. But we thought that we'd put them all on a wall just so that we can see them and just so that we could acknowledge and say to you that we are thinking about all of these things, and we want to keep developing the plan with these things in the forefront of our minds. Things like affordable housing. Gentrification has come up a lot, and I know that that's a concern of people in the neighborhood. Anecdotally, we've heard that people, even today, without us doing anything, have been priced out of the neighborhood. And so how can we correct that? We've heard that people, like I said, want to keep jobs on site. We've heard lots of people talk about the traffic that exists today on Congress Street, on Lafayette, and I'm not even talking about Halloween time. I'm talking about normal times. We've heard about resilience, sea level rise, safety and walkability, connectivity. All of these things have come up at one time or another. And when I look at this word cloud and try to figure out how are we going to address all these things, this is just me, but that's a whole bunch of words. How do I even deal with that? So in my mind, I try to categorize these things into perhaps 3 buckets. So all those words that are in the previous slide are here. And to me, you can categorize each of these concepts and themes into 3 buckets. Maybe there's more, maybe there's less, but for me, this seems to work. Neighborhood. What makes a good neighborhood? What makes a successful neighborhood? Well, it's one that has housing, affordable housing, one that addresses gentrification and keeps people in the neighborhood with safe, walkable streets, connected to other neighborhoods. In this case, I don't have a harbor in my backyard, but this place does. Harbor access, you don't have that today. Harbor access, one that talks about identity and history, talks about this neighborhood as being an immigrant neighborhood for decades, et cetera. The school, open space, et cetera. All those things are ingredients that could make a nice neighborhood. Sustainability, again, these words come from the word cloud and the things that we've heard over time. Resiliency, open green space, native plantings, water access, identity and history. That comes up twice because it seems like it fits both categories. Affordable housing, jobs, renewable energy has come up. And then lastly, a category I would call mobility, and that talks about infrastructure, traffic, parking, where are all these cars going to go at the end of the day. Safety and access, accessibility, et cetera. So one way to look at this is to say, okay, well, let's look at the existing site, Shetland Park, and establish a baseline. Are these ingredients in Shetland Park today for the neighborhood? Well, we know there's no housing on Shetland Park, so there can't be any affordable housing on Shetland Park. There is some in the neighborhood, in the Point neighborhood, but could that be expanded to Shetland Park? We know that there's really not harbor access. If we were to walk out on that berm today, we would probably be chased down by a security guard and asked to not be on that berm and go somewhere else because it's not safe. Is it safe and walkable? Questionable. I mean, there's paint lines on the streets, but it is a little tricky to navigate the parking lots. There's no play areas to speak of. Connectivity, you can see this picture in the bottom middle. There's a big iron fence along Pingree Street that basically says keep out. I mean, that's essentially what it does. Are there jobs and training programs on site? Yes, there are jobs. Are there training programs? I'm not sure. The next category, if I can get it to go, sustainability. How are we doing there? Not many native plants unless you count the weeds that are along the berm. Resiliency, we know that the seawall has had troubled times. There's parts of the seawall that need to be fixed. In some places it's not high enough. Jobs and training, yes, for 1924, but not so much for 2024. If anybody has ideas for building a textile mill, see Patrick. We have just the building for you, but if there isn't, it looks like that large building on the other side of the campus needs to be addressed. Is there open green space? I think not. An interesting, found this old photo from 1930, and this is an aerial shot of Shetland Park. I guess there was a biplane that flew over to get this shot. We didn't have Google Maps yet, but the only thing that we've done to this black and white photo is color the lawn sections. Where you see those green areas, that's where cars are parking today. And what's interesting about this photo from 1930 to me is that, number one, there's no cars. It's all green space. And I'm not saying that in 1930, Shetland Park was this great space where all the workers got to go outside and picnic in the park during the long lunch breaks or anything like that. But I am saying that this is a time when there weren't too many cars around, so that those areas could be green. At some point, those green areas were turned into places to park, which tells me that the people who work at Shetland Park don't live in the neighborhood, or not too many of them do, because they're driving here. So that's a factor that we need to take into consideration, which leads us into mobility. How are we doing there? Well, there is traffic on Congress. Everybody agrees there. Walkability, not so much on Shetland Park, especially a day like today. I'm sure a lot of you didn't like that walk from the gymnasium over to here. Little warm today. But infrastructure, there's a nice electric line running along that berm. That could be better. And parking. There's parking all over this site, but it's not great, unsightly, and sort of hard to navigate. So our baseline case of how we're doing with this site as it is today, it definitely could be improved. But all of these things lead to opportunities, and we could set ourselves a few goals. We could reconnect this neighborhood by having safe, pedestrian-friendly streets, connecting back to the Point neighborhood, taking that iron fence down from Pingree Street and reconnecting the site. Integrate the community with work, live, play, and learn spaces. We have a school that adds extra flavor of mixed use. Design with appropriate scale and proportion. Mitigate the traffic impacts with bike lanes, shuttle buses, water taxis, water shuttles to the various MBTA pickup points. And then a vision for social equity. We know that we need to build in affordable housing on this site. We know that, and we will do that. But we can also invest in the local culture. We know that this site has always been an immigrant community. It's been various immigrants from various places, whether it's Irish or today it's Dominican Republic. In 50 years, it might be something else. But this neighborhood has always been a springboard for people to move here, grow families, and improve their lives. Provide new community, and to that end, provide new community rooms and nonprofit spaces and keep the nonprofits that are already here today at Shetland Park. There's lots of economic opportunity here on site. Again, keep those jobs in Salem, in the neighborhood, and leverage the fact that the wind farm or the wind terminal is going to bring jobs in there, and we can help support that here at Shetland Park with all those support businesses and activity that could help, that could occur. Provide new space for a future high-tech business, and build an incubator on Shetland Park. So some of you have heard Mr. Moser, the owner of the CEO of Prime, talk about an incubator that has been created in the Dominican Republic that he runs. And he wants to set up a similar incubator here on site to provide free space for young entrepreneurs who have a dream and an idea to nurture those ideas and build businesses. And finally, and this isn't in any order, I think all of these are important, but a vibrant waterfront that establishes the waterfront as something that we can all of you, all of Salem can get to. Right now, you really can't get to it. But we want to make that available and build it in a resilient and sustainable way. We have lots of ideas there. And finally, have lots of open space and parks. So that's a set of goals that comes directly from the feedback that we've gotten over the last 3 years. It comes directly from the feedback that folks like you have given us. So let's look at the plan as it is today. So this is another aerial of the Point neighborhood with Shetland Park sort of highlighted there. Just to orient you, we are in this building today. Downtown is off the screen to the left. The Palmer Cove Park is to the right. The Palmer Cove Marina is off to the right. And the Point neighborhood is at the lower half of the screen. I'm going to change this to a line drawing because sometimes that's a little bit easier to read. And point out that each of these buildings have very creative names, B1 and B2. We're in B2 right now. B1 and B2 are both commercial buildings, office buildings, professional offices, and the like. B3 is the school. Well, we're in the school now, but the school is spread out into 3 distinct areas. But B3 is the main school building with the classrooms. B4, you'll hear me talk about B4 a lot. That's the large building, the wide, deep, long building that has the sawtooth roof. And of course, everybody knows where the garage and the gym are. So, what can we do about this site to make it better for today's needs? One idea is to say, well, the school isn't in the most ideal configuration. Could we move that to the south of the site? And B4 is not the most efficient way to lay out a commercial space. If you're the poor soul who has an office in the middle of this building. You have no windows, and you're pretty far away from the building perimeter. And if you've ever been in there, it can be sort of hard to get around because there's a lot of turns and nooks and crannies. So what if we swap positions with those two structures? What if we took, in the yellow there is the school. So we're here in the auditorium. This is the arts complex. Here's the main school building, and here's the gym. What if we took all three of those yellow rectangles, the school components, and built a new building at the southern end of the site, next to the Palmer Cove Marina? Move that down south, give it a purpose-built building, functional, under one roof, not three, so that school kids don't have to go back and forth across traffic like they do right now. And once that building is relocated, then B4 can be more efficiently placed in its position. So swap those two buildings. I don't know if any of you know this, but underneath the single floor at B4 is a basement. That's where prime storage is. It's a great spot for cars. It would be underground, out of view from the streets. We would provide easy access, and I can go through that if we get to that level of detail. But all around that site, all around B4, all those parking areas, what if we lifted up that ground plane to about elevation 17, which is above the 2070 FEMA standard, well above it. To lift that ground plane up at that level would be all of a sudden that ground plane is above the parking and at a level where everybody can see the harbor. There's a lot of places in the parking lots of next to B4 where you can't see over the berm. You can be 20 feet away from the harbor and not even see the water. That's astounding to me, but it's true. Next thing, once you have established that new ground plane, if we can extend those streets that exist in the Point neighborhood today, so Levitt, Palmer, Lynch, extend those streets toward the harbor and connect them. And also include north-south streets. So create a new street grid that takes up from where the existing street grid from the neighborhood is. Make them walkable. If you can walk on Palmer Street today between Congress and Pingree, you'll be able to walk from Pingree to the water. And I'm not saying that these streets are all for vehicles. Many of them won't be. Many of them will just be pedestrian only, or bikes, and so forth. So once you establish that street grid, then you can wrap the whole thing with a green area, a harbor walk. So starting from a new parklet at the Congress Street Bridge, walking all the way between B1 and B2, all this green area would be no cars, just walking space all the way around. It's about 2/3 of a mile perimeter around that property. And if you add it up, just from this green area, from here all the way to the right, is about 8 acres. And as a reminder, the Salem Common is about 9 acres. So almost the size of the Salem Common. Not in a square, not in a rectangle with lots of crisscrossy sidewalks, granted, but it's still quite a lot of open space. For 30 acres, 8 acres of that would be next to the water, accessible by pedestrians. That street grid starts to make parcels. And you can start to see that here's the school, and we haven't designed it yet, it's just a placeholder, but a new school under one roof at the southern end, and then what I said earlier was that frees up this space here for a new commercial building. So 2 potential parcels for commercial building. And then the rest of it in blue could be new residential buildings. So starting with the north end, or the left side, closest to downtown, we accumulate all of that commercial space that's in B4 today and build a new purpose-built commercial building here adjacent to B1 and B2 closest to downtown, easy access to walk across the bridge and into downtown and to the T. And then the southern end of the site, southern half of the site, is left for residential. And so you can start to imagine that there would be structures built for residential apartments. So it's somewhat segregated, but it's still on the same site. At the base of each of these, residential and commercial buildings could be, small retail, service retail, could be coffee, could be, what have you, laundry, etc. But let's try to mold those buildings a little bit so that the massing of those buildings isn't so. We mass the buildings so that we take advantage of perspectively not having giant walls in your face if you live on Pingree Street. And I can show you later on. I'll show you some views of that. So going back, the things that we've heard, we've tried to identify and locate some of these things on this plan. So again, 1 million square feet exists today of commercial space. We would have 1 million square feet of commercial space here. None of it would go away. No businesses would have to go away. We want those businesses that exist here today to stay here, including nonprofits. We would try to locate a water taxi or a water shuttle from the site over to the ferry building for the time of year that the ferry runs to Boston. Transient boating slips, if we can manage that. We've started talking to the harbor master about that. We've heard about a food desert that exists here in the Point neighborhood. Could we include a grocery? We think we have space for it if there's a need. We would program civic space all around the site. So including keeping a portion of the B4 building right here, and I'll show you a rendering of that in a minute. And that could be a community space. It could be lots of different things. We have ideas for food sources or community spaces, et cetera. So nonprofits and civic space. An incubator, remember I talked about that a minute ago. In this building, it was a community health building. But that could be converted into a new incubator that could be designed so that it connects to this new commercial space. And then neighborhood streets flowing through the site. This is Palmer Street connecting right through. A new street here, Levitt Street connecting right through, et cetera. Parks and playgrounds at the southern end. Lots of green space around the school, between the school and the harbor. And then a crisscrossing network of sidewalks along the harbor there. I talked about the new school building, kayak launches. We have lots of ideas for how to activate the southern end. Okay, and so I'm going to show you a series of renderings, and then I'm finally going to shut up. So what we're thinking of, this is 30 acres. There's a lot you can do with 30 acres. It doesn't have to be all one character. It can be many characters. There can be a commercial district that looks one way and a residential area that looks another. The scale, proportion, activities, these can all define what these spaces are, the streets and the spaces between buildings. A civic space alongside a new hotel and that community space. And obviously the academic row there. So I'm going to show you a series of renderings, starting with the harbor side and then progressing through the commercial and marching south. So there is a view, and if you can see it, in the bottom right corner is the same view today, so taken from Google Map. So that's what you would see today if this view were this. So here's the seawall. And we have to build that up somewhat. We have to repair it a little bit. But right next to it is all of this green space that I showed on the plan. And it's modeled in a way that there's a little bit of slant to it so that if water were to breach that seawall, it still wouldn't affect the residential or any of the commercial space adjacent. Because the first floor of the new buildings would be up at a level they just wouldn't be affected. Between B1 and B2, Again, here's what you see today, standing in the same point. You see a bridge down there and lots of brick and concrete glass openings there. But what if it was enlivened with art and culture and stores and food markets and things like that? We turn this between B2. You see these cars parked here. Yes, there would have to be loading areas for vehicles like that. Yes, there would have to be emergency access. We would have all of that. But primarily, this area could be pedestrian only. And then at that community space, I told you we'd keep a portion of that B4 building. So you can see B2 in the background here, and a portion of this is where the Registry of Deeds was. And we would convert that into another use, community-based. Behind it is a hotel, but outdoor spaces to sit, to have food, to relax, and meet with friends. Turning in the same position and looking south, you can see the Derby light right here across the channel there. And then all of this space on the water side is available for people to walk, to relax and visit. And then looking west, this is the view that you have today if you're standing in that parking lot. But this is that residential area that could have steps and stoops where people can meet and talk and meet friends, and walk their dogs, etc. Planting, lots of plantings all over the site. And then standing at Palmer Street, we're standing at Palmer Street looking across at Pingree Street. Pingree runs horizontally along the bottom of the page here. And we would set back these buildings from Pingree Street, making that a much wider streetscape that would allow us to have water features, open parklets, and spaces for outdoor spaces to spill out from the existing buildings. Again, this street also would be pedestrian only alongside each of those buildings. And there's that view again from Pingree, seeing that, or from Palmer, looking at that iron fence. And then finally at the southern end, Salem Academy, with its purpose-built building. It's not designed yet, but a building there for the school to use under one roof. School bus lane. So this part of Levitt Street would be vehicular. And then on the other side of the school is a park at the southeastern corner of the site. So we could have a band, we can plan anything. We can have a bandstand here looking out toward the water. We can have a new playground alongside the school. Lots of spaces for the school kids to relax in and also enjoy out, but anybody can be there. So it's open and available to the public at all times. So an overview of an aerial view of the site. And what you might notice is how much green there is here. Because we plan on having the ability to have green roofs, solar panels on roofs. We have ideas for incorporating geothermal technology here for mechanical systems, thereby decreasing the need for consuming a lot of energy, and trying to make this site as energy efficient as possible, but also cut down on that heat island effect that is in full effect today, especially with all of that asphalt. And there's a look at it from the water side with the park at the bottom, the southeastern corner. So I think that is it for me. So sorry to be so long. Wanted to try to, thank you though. It's the first time that's ever happened. I wanted to try to give you as much information as possible, but I want to turn it over to who we introducing. So I think we're going to introduce our team and then do a overview of the 40R process with the zoning. So I'll hand it to Jeff, who will hand it to.
Thank you. Keep the best picture up there. So thank you everyone for coming out. And so as Sean has mentioned, we have a full team here to present the project. I'm not going to be presenting, and I think you heard as part of the introduction, really here to listen. So my name is Jeffrey Dirk. I'm the managing partner with Vanessa & Associates, and we are retained to help with the transportation planning for the project. So that's what our role will be as a part of this project. So the feedback that we're looking from you, and some of it we've already heard, and I think Sean went through the idea of sustainability. He had a section on mobility, which of course is what I'll be focused on. But I think a lot of what we're going to be discussing as it relates to transportation is some of the lack of resources that are available in this area. So Sean is showing something where what we're really focused on is not an auto-centric project. And when you see how he's laid this out, it's really to hide the automobiles, develop some green space. And what we're looking to do from a transportation perspective is to re-engage with public transportation. How do we connect the neighborhood in this project to public transportation? And then looking at pedestrians and bicycles in this area, because what we want to do is really reduce the parking demands, reduce the traffic demands associated with the project. So we start with the same premise that Sean is looking at, which is making this sustainable. And from a transportation perspective, that means reducing automobile traffic coming to the site, encouraging pedestrian and bicycle traffic, and then also looking off-site. So we know we have congested roadways. We know in a lot of instances, especially as you're heading towards Lafayette, running out of there we go. We have locations where traffic doesn't move very efficiently, and that's probably an understatement. We also have locations where it's not safe to walk or bike, and we know the city has put a lot of investment in infrastructure. There's improvements that have been taking place in the area, but really, as we were talking about opportunities, this project and the development presents opportunities to be able to build upon the infrastructure that the city is invested in and enhance some of the streets that are closer to the project site. So a lot of what you see with the addition of safer sidewalks, push buttons to be able to cross at intersections where you don't have that ability today, those are the type of improvements that can be basically brought into the neighborhood as a part of this project. So it's taking all of the good things that Sean has mentioned within the site and then bringing those out into the neighborhood and connecting that. So our role as the transportation planners is we're looking at that. Fix the existing infrastructure, make it more efficient, make it much safer to walk and bike on these roadways, and then bring all of that into the project site. So feedback as it relates to that is something that's going to be very important to me so that I can take that back and look at making recommendations on how this project can facilitate those enhancements for the city. So turn it over to Zach.
Thank you, Jeff. Good evening, everyone. My name is Zach Richards. I'm a professional engineer with Bowler and senior project manager. We're the site civil engineer on the project. So although this is my first meeting and time meeting most of you, we've been working with the team in the background for the past 3 years. We've been working closely with Sean and Arrow Street to identify some of those critical resilient elevations to design to for from a flood perspective. We've been reviewing utility infrastructure very closely, which includes sewer, water, and also drainage and stormwater approaches with a lot of this green space that Sean's pointed out. We've got 8 acres to get a little creative with the stormwater management approaches and some of that floodplain resiliency to utilize some of that green space to also function as creative ways to manage the stormwater runoff, right? As we get into the 40R process again, I'm going to be more and more involved. We're working very closely with the city and DPW, who we've worked with in the past on other projects, to make sure we're properly evaluating all of that utility infrastructure. And the goal here is to demonstrate that that infrastructure is adequate to serve the project or can be reasonably upgraded to serve it. So again, happy to answer any questions as we get into the questions and also more of the discussion, the breakout groups to follow.
Thanks, Zach. Do you mind, Sean, advancing the slide? Good evening, everyone. My name is Peter Tam, and we're saving, I think, the most boring for last. I apologize. I'm one of the lawyers on this team. My colleague, Jadi Sanchez, and I are going to team up on this. We'll promise to be brief. I'm going to improvise a little as Sean's trying to get the slides. So, a quick show of hands. who likes what they're seeing so far? Or maybe is moderately interested in seeing some redevelopment on this site? Well, the lawyers come into play here for a simple reason, not to get in the way, but to solve a problem. And the problem here is the zoning does not allow for what Sean has shown, okay? The zoning are the rules that the city has established that allow for redevelopment. And in this case, if you advance one slide, there are two sets of rules that apply to the area that you see here. There's an underlying industrial zoning district, which was historically the zoning that applied when this was predominantly an industrial use. And then there was a more recent overlay. And an overlay zone is exactly what it sounds like. It sits on top of the industrial zone. And this overlay zone, the Waterfront Industrial Overlay District, expands the number of uses, but the rules still apply. The industrial rules still apply. So these are some of the uses that are allowed in this overlay zone and in the underlying district. Unfortunately, these rules do not allow for, number one, any residential use, and number two, hospitality, so a hotel. And these are fundamentally important uses, and we've heard that they're important. The idea of expanding affordability and expanding housing opportunities on this site is critical. That housing drives a true mix of uses. It drives economic development. It will incentivize businesses, including restaurants, retail, office, to locate here. So without changing the rules to allow for residential use here, none of this really can happen. And so that's why we're in a very early process of working with the city on changing the rules. And those rules would change to allow fundamentally for some residential use as a mix of uses here. It would also provide flexibility. So if we go to the next slide, what we are working and beginning to work with the city, and Kate from the city planning office is here. You should feel free to, in addition to us, look to her as a resource if you have questions, because the planning office did a very good presentation to the city council on rezoning opportunities and how the tool that we're thinking of using here might work. And we're going to get into that. What we're proposing is a new overlay district that would sit on top of the industrial district. The existing overlay could be removed or it could stay. It doesn't matter. This new overlay district would allow for residential uses in addition to the existing uses. It would allow for hotel, and it would provide greater flexibility to allow for the type of buildings and the layout that Sean described. Next slide, please. Before I turn it over to Jody, the tool that we're thinking, the specific zoning tool, goes by the acronym 40R. And all 40R is a law in Massachusetts, and it's known as the Smart Growth Law. And it's a law that the legislature adopted to promote the creation of housing and affordable housing by incentivizing communities like Salem to adopt dense, mixed-use development areas that will create housing. Because there is a real housing crisis, both here in Salem and throughout the Commonwealth. So 40R here adds some benefits that just changing the zoning would not. So the city of Salem is always free to adopt new zoning and to make zoning changes through your city council. 40R adds a layer which requires pre-review and then final approval by the state. Now, why is that required? Because the state, in turn, in exchange for Salem adopting new zoning, 40R smart growth zoning here, that will allow for dense multifamily in addition to the mix of uses, the state will actually pay the city of Salem a significant amount of money, both for the zoning change to incentivize Salem to create more housing, and then to actually build that housing. And it's not insignificant amount of money. So in addition to the economic development benefits that flow from redevelopment here, Salem has an opportunity, not just here, but in other locations in Salem, to adopt 40R smart growth zoning, where they get additional benefits from the state. I'm going to turn it over to Jody to talk a little bit about impacts, and then a little bit more about the process before we open it up to questions. After the questions, I understand we'll have the opportunity to kind of break out into smaller groups where you can ask us any additional detailed questions. I think there's also some moderately warm pizza left. Here's Jody.
Thank you, Peter. I'm Jody Sanchez from Wilson and Storrs Council for the project. And in addition to council, I'm also the daughter of Dominican immigrants. So I understand some of the concerns that the community is highlighting here. What we have here is a chart focused on 4 specific areas that have been identified in numerous planning studies that have had extensive community feedback, including the Sasaki study that you all were a part of. Something that we've heard is the need for housing diversification. So not just not just studios, but really all types of different housing. We're planning to have studios, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, and mixed income housing to support local businesses. So part of this project is, to have quite a lot of affordability. Specifically, 40R requires at least 20% to be affordable at 80% area medium income. And so what we're proposing here is 1,200 residential units, like I said, including affordable and market rate housing with a mix of unit types. One of the advantages as a 4DR that Peter had mentioned, that Peter had alluded to, was this state incentive payments. So there are one-time bonus payments, depending on the amount of housing proposed. Based on 1,200 units, there is a base of $600,000 that the state gives to the city once zoning is adopted, plus $3,000 per unit at the time of building permit, actually. So in total, in the aggregate, this project has a potential for $4.2 million worth of state funded incentives, again, given to the city. So with that, I'm going to go down to economic development. We've heard from the studies and from you directly the need for skills training and access to jobs. Now, that is why we are proposing a mix of uses here to promote economic stability and diverse revenue streams. So we are planning to have commercial, residential, there'll be restaurants, retail, neighborhood-oriented businesses, and that'll generate, commercial, that'll generate just different streams of tax revenue for the city, and provide great opportunities, to partner with local businesses. We, as part of this project, will also obviously generate quite a lot of new construction jobs and long-term jobs. And we know that Shetland Park has been a very important job center for, since the textile mills days. So we very much intend to continue being that for this community. As Jeff mentioned on our team, with respect to mobility, we've heard that folks want to see better transit access, we have a traffic impact study underway that informs the project design. And as mentioned before, we also are supporting multimodal transportation. With the other big item that we've heard about in these studies has been, about the waterfront and access to the waterfront. Now there is a perception of isolation. Obviously, there is a fence that separates the neighborhood. The open space here is primarily made of asphalt. So we are planning to completely transform that with about 8 acres of waterfront parks and other green spaces, an extension of Salem Harbor Walk, which will sort of connect open spaces like Palmer Cove to the site, and then increase the walkability generally. Can you advance the slide, please? And this is just a summary of sort of what I just mentioned. Mix of affordable and market rate units. There is a robust public process built into the 40R process. This is one of many community meetings that have been had and will be had. We want to hear your input to continue to iterate and refine this project. We talked about public open space, neighborhood-oriented businesses, the incentives we talked about, as well as generation of new construction and long-term jobs. Can you advance the slide, please? Thank you. So this is a summary of the 40R zoning process at a very, very high level. As I mentioned, the very first step of the 40-hour process is community engagement, and that is why it's important that you're here today, that we hear from you today on the project, on what you've seen. And like I said, we'll have more of these, but we are looking forward to hearing, your feedback. So as part of the planning and zoning process, in consultation with the city and state, a draft application will be prepared. There'll be a public meeting held by the mayor or the mayor's designee, informal state review, and this is even before a formal application is even submitted. And when I talk about application, I'm really talking about just the zoning ordinance. I'm not talking about what a specific building is going to look like. This is just the zoning ordinance. So then after that, the city council considers and votes on the zoning as well as the development agreement or community benefits agreement, which will memorialize any mitigation and benefits for the community. And then the last step here is final state approval of the zoning. And as I mentioned, only then can individual buildings move forward for actual site plan approval. So there will be ample opportunities for continued, engagement with the community, for you to appear before conservation commissions, the planning board, as each individual building is advanced, again, after the zoning is approved. You can advance the slide, please. Oh, and that's it. So once again, we thank you for joining us. I'm going to turn it over to Patrick.
Thank you, everyone. Anyone want to start? Fire away. We actually have an extra microphone, yeah.
That's okay, I can stand up. I'm just curious, between the residences,
Do they say who they are?
oh, Susie Moulton, 98 Washington Square East in Salem. Between the residences here, the businesses, the hospitality, and the school, how many people will be coming and going from this site more or less every day?
And how does it compare to what's currently moving in and out of this site?
Yeah, I don't know what currently is.
Well, that's
So my
right.
first question is the number. Secondly, we have 2 streets to get in and out of Salem, and how's that number?
If I tried, I'd be lying.
So as we mentioned, and I apologize, I'm sorry, I want to make sure I'm looking right at you, and I apologize for having my back to you while you were speaking. So we're in the process of undertaking that transportation analysis, and I think the key thing is, to answer your question, really what we need to understand is what are we going to have for transportation infrastructure to serve the site. So if we take the premise that in order to have the density that we're talking about here, that we have to have connection to transit service, either a shuttle service or bus service, if the MBTA for some reason just, we are able to get them to re-envision providing bus service down here, we can actually reduce the traffic numbers down to get somewhere close to what's here today. But realistically, it depends upon the amenities that are here. I mean, if there's a supermarket that's going to be here, there's no supermarket here, clearly that's going to generate more traffic than an office building. So it's really contingent upon what we end up with as a part of the master plan, as a part of the project, and what transportation resources are available. What's difficult always to envision is when you look at the density that's being proposed here, is what you have to imagine is you can't just build that. And I think that's what a lot of the speakers were talking about, without envisioning that there has to be improvements. Because you could not, if this was just auto-centric and we don't have access to public transportation, we could never get this approved. Because I think what Peter was mentioning, he was asking you, how many people want to see the site developed, how many people would like to see something like what you've seen here developed on the site. Even with the zoning overlay applied to the project site, it just allows for someone to apply for these uses. It still means that we have to go, as was mentioned, if we want to build what you saw on the plan here, we have to bring that forth to the city council, to the city boards for approval. And we have to demonstrate that it's not going to create a detriment to public health, safety, and welfare, meaning that if what's proposed doesn't come with adequate infrastructure so that it doesn't create congestion or gridlock on the street system, it will never get approved. So what's being asked is to be allowed to apply to the city for the uses, but it's incumbent upon us to demonstrate that there's adequate infrastructure, and adequate infrastructure is water and sewer, as Zach had mentioned. From my perspective, it means the roads have to be able to handle the traffic. And there'll be a public hearing where we present, here's the project, here's what we're asking for, and here's all the improvements that go along with it. And we have to demonstrate that it's not going to create gridlock. So if that means there's a shuttle bus and it's running every hour or every half an hour and is taking people from the site to the train station, or if there's a bus service coming in, if that's what's required, then that's what has to be done. So what we're talking about for the zoning overlay, it just allows us to make an application for something, but we still have to demonstrate it works, and you all still come out, you look at the transportation analysis and say, that intersection doesn't work, and we see what you're proposing to do there, but it's not making it any better. We can't do that. We have to demonstrate that we're making it better. We have to demonstrate that we're not creating congestion on the roadway. So our goal is there's going to be an increase in traffic. We need to make sure that we can manage it, but we also want to try to shift it to a different mode other than having people walk here. But it's also about the mix of uses that Sean was mentioning. If we have neighborhood type of uses rather than a draw. So if we put something down here that is going to be a draw for people from the outside to come in versus the neighborhood to walk to it, that's going to generate traffic more so than if it's a neighborhood-focused, small-size supermarket that you can walk to that's not going to draw from elsewhere. So, we're still in the early planning stages, but I think the important thing is when we bring forth a building as allowed under the zoning overlay that's allowed, we have to submit a traffic study that says, here's how we're mitigating the impacts. If we don't mitigate those impacts, it's not likely going to get it approved. Just because we have the right to apply for it doesn't mean it gets approved.
But my big question was how many people a day? 5,000? 1,200 units times 2 is 24 plus.
It's not necessarily that you're going to have 2 or 3 trips per unit that's going to occur. It's probably, if you wanted to look at it, if we had no access to public transportation, if you said roughly half a trip or a trip per unit, because not everyone comes and goes at the same time. So yeah, you could be talking about the residential units generating somewhere around probably about, no access to public transportation, you'd be talking somewhere around 300 to 400 trips during the peak hour dispersed around the roadways. But again, that's why that doesn't work.
Now my question was how many people on site, and then I'll be quiet.
Can you use the microphone so other people can hear the question?
I'm sorry, my question was how many people will be on site between the businesses, the school, the residences, etc. I'm just trying to get a number. 4,000?
I have that, so I can do that. Next meeting, I'll have a better answer.
Thank you. Thank you.
Lou Siriani, 194 Lafayette Street. I have 2 simple questions. You've rendered a lot of housing, looks like 5-story units or 5-story levels. How many total units altogether?
It's 1,200 units, and
1,200.
then yes, and 200.
And
Yeah, go ahead.
will the parking be under those buildings?
Yes, predominantly under those buildings.
Under those buildings?
Yes.
So
Well, the
it-
garage that's already here,
Plus the garage that's already
and then
there, but
underneath, and then there will be
parking
street
under.
parking, but that is not to be. The intent is that's an extension of street parking for the neighborhood, etc.
So the residential streets that you show between the buildings in the renderings will include automobiles?
Some do. Some of those streets were pedestrian only, pedestrian and fire, fire emergency.
Very good. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, go ahead.
My name is Lily, and I'm just CC, I represent CC, and my question is,
Microphone, we can't.
I don't need the microphone, I think.
I'll repeat the question,
Do
Special.
you have any strategic plan with the Salem Police or the fire department to deal with the population that we're gonna have in the neighborhood?
The population of the neighborhood?
The overpopulation
Oh.
that's gonna bring, I don't think we have the capacity to deal with all that over traffic and.
So your concern is, I want to make sure I get it right, your concern is police presence, fire presence with the expansion. So I think it was even before the current police chief, I had a conversation with the police department about putting a little outpost in one of these buildings. So yes, and they were open and receptive to it. And it could just be, it could be a 500 square foot, but it was something that was to say police out front. I have not talked to the police department again. I haven't talked to them about that in 2.5 years. So it is something I need to revisit, but it's on the list. That's why we're here.
Soy residente del punto por 30 años, pero ¿por qué hoy no traen un traductor cuando habemos tantas personas del punto que no entendemos buen inglés? Yo creo que es muy importante en una reunión como esta traer un traductor, ¿no? Para que las personas que somos residentes entendamos correctamente en nuestro idioma lo que está pasando. Esa es mi pregunta.
I am the translator from Linguistic Systems, but I wasn't announced. I had no idea about how many non-English speaking people. Yo no supe cuántas personas que solamente hablan español estaban en el teatro. Precisamente, para eso estoy aquí, para responder cualquier pregunta. Todo ocurrió muy rápido.
Altagracia's question, she gets to the point. She's a point neighborhood resident. She's asking why was the meeting fully in English? Understanding that there's many people in the community that only speak Spanish.
To piggyback on that question, I also live in the Point, and I didn't hear about this meeting until I just happened to be in the Penn gift shop, and the cashier mentioned it, and I live a block away from here. I didn't see a single sign, flyer, nothing in the mail. If I hadn't been in the Penn shop and the cashier hadn't mentioned it, I would never have known. So that's also a very important point.
Two things. Nicholas, I'm sorry. I didn't realize. I've been standing there looking for the translator. Didn't realize you were here.
Right there.
Yeah, I know. I get it now. So my
Ringside.
apologies. So we did have a translator here to help translate as we went through the slides. My apologies. I didn't realize Nicholas was here. Maybe we can spend a few minutes afterwards and we can go through some things in Spanish. I'm happy to spend as much time as you need to go through and help.
Al final de la reunión o después de que salgamos aquí, yo me puedo reunir con ustedes, explicarle con detalle ciertas cosas. I am a civil engineer, yo soy ingeniero civil, me encantan estos proyectos y la presentación ha sido estupenda. Entonces,
¿Tienen alguna pregunta? Él puede hacer todo en español.
Por ejemplo, ellas están ahí, pero no están entendiendo porque ellas no saben inglés.
She says that she feels bad about the people next to her that only speak Spanish. They have no idea what's going on.
entendido. El problema fue completamente fuera de mi alcance porque es muy difícil saber sin conversar con las personas cuál es la situación.
I think what we can do is we're going to go to breakout group soon. We'll have
Yeah,
just
in the break.
we'll just have Nicholas for once, where everyone's Spanish.
Right.
I can be part of that. We can have someone from Arrow Street part of that, and I can have someone from Goulston Stores or Tinty part of that, so we can kind of give you the. We can assist. We can.
Right.
The intent is to get the word out and help, not hinder. And we did do mailers. We did not. Clearly, you didn't get one. We did do mailers, off on a butters list. We did post. I'll work on doing a better job. So one of the reasons I did a sign-in sheet today was very much to get everyone's email. So going forward, emails will be generated as well. So
20% affordable housing and that's the minimum amount required. 20% of affordable housing in that complex.
Hold on.
That's the. Okay, I'll get take that. So 20% affordable housing in this whole complex. I think that's the minimum amount required for getting the Salem or the Massachusetts tax credit. It feels kind of disingenuous that it would only be 20% in a 100% affordable neighborhood currently. It just feels like we could do a better job holding development to do more than the minimum for affordable housing. Like 20% feels like a very small number out of 1,200. So
agree with you, and have been, working my way through the Salem community for the past, since before COVID. And traffic and affordability is, the constant is what I hear all the time. And we know it's not enough. We understand it's not enough. That's what we put up because that's what the 40R minimums are. But I think in the end, that's not what we're proposing. We've had some talks with the CDC. We've got some parcels across the street. How do we integrate that? That's not in this, right? So how do we work with the CDC to improve on what that could be? Because we also have, I think there's also some state maximums as well. So we have to navigate that as well. I think I could be wrong. Not a maximum, but there's a certain, we have to stay within a certain amount.
I don't have much to add, but in terms of the 20% affordability, you bring up a good point in terms of the percentage affordability. The other part of it is the extent of affordability, right? It doesn't, not necessarily. So, and keep in mind, 20% is double what the inclusionary ordinance of Salem requires, which is only 10% right now. So this is what I think Patrick has it right. We're working with the city on this. The 20% is not set in stone, but we do know that if 40R, if the smart growth overlay law is going to be the tool that the city ultimately uses here or elsewhere, that 20% at 80% average median income would be accepted by the state. To go deeper in terms of affordability or greater in terms of percentage requires some discretion by the state. So these are discussions we're having with city officials and we'll be having with state officials. So stay tuned on that, and we appreciate the interest.
We know that needs to be better than what was discussed.
Pat?
Yeah.
Patrick, I have a question over here.
Good evening. My name is Perla Piguero, and my address is at 30 Boardman Street in Salem. I have a number of questions. The slides are beautiful, nice. I wanted to know, it looked as though there were or a variety of levels of buildings, and I was wondering, what, I apologize that I didn't get here right on time, so I don't know if you covered this. How tall are they? How many floors do they go? That's one of my questions. I know you, sir, are going to be working on the numbers. I was just thinking that if you have 1,200 units, you probably have a projection of how many studio, 2- and 3-bedroom apartments you'll have, assuming full capacity, you should be able to sort of give some rough numbers with regard to how many people, little people as well as big people, would be occupying those. The other question that I have is there a difference in square footage? Are you planning a difference in square footage of the, let's use an example, 2-bedroom market price unit versus a 2-bedroom affordable unit?
By law, they can't be different.
They can't?
No.
Okay, that's great. I'm psyched to hear that. Thank you. But my other question still stands. The height, et cetera. Thank you, sir.
So some of the buildings are tall, up to 12 stories. They would be in the middle of the site. As I explained earlier, perspectively, we want to make it so that as you're walking along Palmer Street or Levitt Street, you're not encountering a 12-story building right there at Pingree Street, but they're set back inside the site so that the effects of that are not as apparent on Pingree, on Palmer, et cetera, on Congress Street, et cetera. The middle question was, the unit mix. We're still working on that. We do have matrices that we've worked on, but it's by no means final. There is a percentage of studios, 1s, 2s, and 3s. There are fewer in general. There are fewer 3-bedroom apartments than there are studios and 1s, just because that's generally they're more market ready if they're smaller, but they were right. A 2-bedroom apartment for market rate has to be is the same size as an affordable unit. I think I promised back here, so.
Thank you, Sean. Alphonse Wright, 12 Hancock Street, Salem, Mass. I was going to get into the AMI thing, but I'll let that settle for now, even though the AMI for Salem is 10,000 lower than the AMI for Boston. And I know you have to use federally the Boston projection, which is a whole other issue. However, my question is, of the 1,200 units for residential, how many of them are going to be accessible units?
We're required to have at least 5% accessible units across the board. We're just because of construction practices and techniques, we generally make more than that. There are usually a huge number of accessible ready, because not everybody needs an accessible unit, so we make some accessible ready, easy to swap out, countertops and things like that.
Can you answer that? So the question was how many accessible units will it require? And Sean had said the code requires 5, but
5%.
5%.
Accessible. No, accessible.
Accessible.
Yes. So
accessible
handicap.
in price or handicap. Okay. Hay un 5% de las residencias que serán construidas que tendrán acceso para personas con handicap, silla de ruedas, problemas, rampas, etcétera.
Oh, that's quite all right, thank you. It's good for me to stand. I'm Jack Butterworth. I live on Holly Street for the last 30 years. I'm a member of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Board. I saw, and I believe that 40R was actually written a number of years ago, and that the way it's phrased in our city information sheet is that you do at least 20% of the units affordable, and the minimum affordability is 80% AMI. Since this law was created, on the Affordable Housing Board, we have heard proposals from people who are talking about 60% AMI and 30% AMI. And if I can just give you a quick explanation of what that means, 60% appears to be a level that allows public employees to live in the community that they serve. 30%, oh, thank you. There's a few of you here tonight, yeah. And 30% is for people who really need housing. And I would hope, and I know this is all negotiation as you go forward, as to what you can afford to do for us and what we can afford to get you to do for us. But I would urge that you do as many 30% units as possible. There are people in this city who need that level of affordable housing. And as much as I hope that public employees will also have the opportunity to live here, the 30% level also need our attention. Thank you.
Maybe. Maybe you will.
In saying we need to provide 30%, not 60, not 80. We need to provide 30%.
La pregunta de esta persona tiene que ver con el porcentaje de viviendas que son accesibles económicamente para las personas que tienen necesidad económica y también para favorecer a empleados públicos que viven en el área que podrían beneficiarse viviendo en estas nuevas residencias. Hay un número de 60% y un número de 30% que se tiene que evaluar y aprobar. Y eso depende de todo este proceso.
Let's do a couple more. Go ahead.
Yeah. Vicky Siriani, 6 Spots Court. I want to talk about scale, because I think scale is hugely important in this project. I can do my own numbers. If you're doing 1,200 units, I think on any given day, we're talking about a population between who lives there, who works there, who shops there, 4,500. That is 10%. That population is 10% of what the city has now. You will have to ensure that an infrastructure in terms of transportation, it has to be included in the project. And we all know what happens with big projects like this. When the money's running out and there are overruns, those are the things that get eliminated. So I ask you to talk about the scale of this in a city of this size with what I see as major transportation problems right now. On any given Saturday, it takes you 10 minutes to get down North Street to get into town. So it's a word of caution.
Thank you.
Okay. Esta persona se refiere a la situación que tiene que ver con la congestión, la cantidad de personas. Se habla de 4.500 personas en la nueva área, que es aproximadamente un 10% de la población de la ciudad. Eso requeriría que el acceso a transporte y las facilidades para evitar el exceso de tráfico sea en beneficio de la población. Entonces, eso hay que considerarlo y hay que estudiarlo. Esa es la pregunta que ella tiene y la preocupación que ella tiene.
Hi, I'm Scott Sheehan. I live on Harbor Street. I've never been opposed to this development, at least at some scale. I think the city needs new housing. I'm a little, we've come to a lot of meetings over the last couple of years, and even with the previous owner that was presenting stuff, and I really haven't seen anything new tonight that we didn't see a year and a half ago with the level of detail. It does bother me that some of the neighborhood impacts that we identified when Prime Group took over on the operation side, not the development side, that we brought up a year and a half ago have gone unaddressed, when I think that the development meeting that we're having here could walk over there and say, fix these problems today. So that gives me a little concern about whether or not the neighborhood interests are truly being taken into account. I'm happy to talk that offline. One of the things that I did notice new today was it looks like this is all rental housing, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's no opportunities for low-income, affordable home ownership or anything like that. And I guess that's my question.
Bueno, brevemente. Esta persona está expresando su preocupación de que en su concepto, de acuerdo a lo que he escuchado esta noche, la mayoría de las nuevas viviendas van a ser un negocio de renta, y obviamente eso va a constituir un aumento en los precios y una limitación para las personas de bajos recursos. Esa es su preocupación en general.
Currently, it is all rental units. Let's do a couple more.
Gavin Gardner, National Park Service, I guess 160 Derby Street. Did I catch it right? Is the seawall 17 feet? Is that what you said?
Correct.
So, and you said that gets you to 2070, but I mean, you can see us in the picture there. We're that long stretch of land, and we're routinely, more or less annually, seeing tides that are like 15, even 16 feet. So when you add a rising sea level and you've parked all the cars underground and put them right next to the ocean, how do you get the 1,200 people out of their houses and they're in the swimming pool, I guess, that's underground now?
Oh, wait, let him translate. Let him translate.
Este señor expresa una preocupación con la muralla de protección en el mar, que es una especie de rompeolas, básicamente, que él piensa que el tamaño, la altura de 17 pies no es suficiente.
The top of the seawall is around 12 or 13. It's not at 17, currently.
Yes, currently. And you're like, everywhere where there's cars right there floods every single year, because we can see it when I take a picture from the cupola. Yep. So you're moving this top of the seawall to 17?
We're moving the top of the seawall only a couple feet, but behind it, we're berming up to 17.
Up to 17. So a 17-foot flood is going to crest that. So if we're getting 15 or 16-foot floods right now, annually, because we've had them the past, 3-4 years, we've had at least 14-foot floods. The flood last year, that Christmas one, almost hit Derby Street on our land, and that's probably 16. So when you add the rising sea level and the 2030 projections, when you add increased storms on top of that, they're going to hit 17. So how do you keep these people dry?
Sure, and, excuse me. 17 was kind of, that's a base number. There's a lot more that goes into it. I think 17 was kind of the minimum. And we've been looking at a couple different, tiers of elevation there. To your point, there's a lot that goes into it, right? A number of different year storms, different storm surge levels. That's all going to be part of that extensive design. I guess we were trying to get across that we've looked closely at those elevations, and that might be, a moving target as we continue to design this. But we are going to design to, the standards of care that make sense, so that, I guess to your point, even if we maybe need to think through the design, if it were to be overtopped, what then, right? What kind of backup systems, belt and suspenders do we have in place to make sure that we're ready for, the worst case scenario? The the garages themselves will need to be carefully waterproofed. We're going to have dewatering systems and such that, in a case like that, you would have an approach to handle those extreme events. But hopefully that helps answer the question. Again, we all know that berm's not nearly as high as it needs to be today, and there's some very low spots there, which is why you see the flooding. And the parking lot itself is even much lower at an elevation. It's closer to 10 in that ballpark, right? So once that gets crested, you're going to see a substantial flooding, and this is going to be far and above what we're seeing out there today.
And the minimum's 15. Currently, we're engineering at 17. So the initial was based on discussions with Woods Hole.
Correct. And then the protection of the cars on the ground, bombs, etc. Correct. Básicamente, la preocupación de las inundaciones y el exceso de lluvia y la subida del mar conduce a la preocupación de que esta pared que existe en este momento de protección se puede llevar hasta un poco más arriba de 12, puede ser 14, 15, pero el suelo detrás, donde están los edificios, va a ser levantado con relleno, de manera de que esté protegido contra inundaciones. Y el área de estacionamientos, que son subterráneas, donde están los vehículos, va a tener una protección contra agua y bombas en caso de que se produzca un problema más serio, más grave, para sacar el agua rápidamente.
Why don't we do one more?
She's been.
Okay.
Hi, Bonnie Bain at 22R West Avenue. I'm with Salem Alliance for the Environment. I just want to say that climate justice is housing justice, and tied to housing justice is language access, especially in this community. And so when we have these public meetings with developers, those developers should come with simultaneous translation. We have translators in this room, in this community, who are great. And I would recommend hiring them and getting some earpieces. So that comment done, I do just want to say that I think the thing that I'm thinking about with SAFE's hat on here is what it means to have offices for offshore wind, and we're excited to see something like that, and the job training piece. There's folks from Mass Hire. I've got some labor friends next to me. Like, what does that actually mean for our community and reaching people? Is that a question for our wind developers, or is it a question for you all?
So I've had a few discussions with Crowley. I've also doing some work with MIT, the engine. Also, I can't remember the name of it, but it was up there a minute ago. It's a North Shore Technology Council. There's also an incubator at the Cummins building. So, and I've worked with Mass Bio, which is in Worcester. This building, right, the new commercial building, is very much intended to be able to serve those types of tough tech, the wind, right? I actually brought a company up from MIT, the engine, which I don't know if it's been in the news a lot recently. It's just a tough tech incubator. The building that's currently there, the Sawtooth building that's currently there, it doesn't meet their needs. So it would, if we had the newer building, they need newer utilities, power, gases, everything that goes into that. So the intent of that new building is to serve that tough tech community, to bring the jobs here and keep the Crowley jobs, in the wind farm here. And Sean touched briefly upon, the ferry going back and forth. Not only that, it could very much be a bus, right? And that's the other reason for the hotel, right? We're trying to keep the Crowley people and all the ancillary business, just talking with them, it's a lot, right? Trying to keep them all here in Salem so we don't lose that.
La intención de que los negocios que ya existen en la zona y en el área se mantengan y permanezcan aquí. Habrán oportunidades, hay un hotel, habrán oportunidades también de empleo para otros negocios que van a entrar y se están haciendo estudios desde el punto de vista tecnológico para estar al día en cuanto a la eficiencia de esos edificios compensada con los avances que la nueva construcción requiere.
One comment from Lucy, and then let's do Bergas.
I don't need the mic. I think people So as president of the Point Neighborhood Association, we do post these meetings on our Facebook page, so I would invite you to like the P&A page. That way you'll have some information as to upcoming meetings. But I'd like to suggest also, I wasn't going to plan, we meet the last Mondays of the month. I wasn't going to do a meeting the end of this month, but given that some of the residents missed out on the first portion, I'd like to see if you can come back, or some, to be able to, kind of redo the slides with simultaneous translation. We'll do it the last Monday of this month. That would be great.
Happy to. And we were also planning on maybe just keeping the Spanish contingent here, Spanish-speaking contingent here. We can go through and do whatever we need to do, but happy to do Monday as well.
Yeah,
Yeah, we can do both. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Millie, para trabajar contigo y Chantel, invitar a los residentes a otras reuniones.
CDC has a WhatsApp group for the community, and
Yeah.
you can join, everybody can join, and we post constantly about this type of meetings and
Sí.
any other events that we have on Metro CDC.
Lo hacemos para final de este mes.
Yes.
Okay, gracias.
Can I suggest for our breakout groups, how many people want to stay and join that? So only a few. Okay, then maybe we don't break out into 3. So just stay. We'll stay. We'll answer questions. And the rest of you, if you don't want to stay, you're free to go. But thank you so much for coming.
Go ahead.
Email that we can, if we come up with other suggestions or questions, we can.
So I am literally going to email. I took pictures. I'm literally going to email everyone if I can read it, and you will then have my email and fire away.